All right, I'm going to go live. Just 2 seconds. Where do we go? Okay, broadcasting, and I'll just move on to Facebook. Okay.
Howdy, folks. Here we are, another Wednesday night. The week's whizzed past. It's been very exciting in the township of Angaston. We're also the valley, runaway rams in the street and all sorts of carry on. So today, in honour of kind of the rebel element for today's Where Was I Drinking little moment, we're going to go to Nashville. The first time I went to Nashville was 1998. I stayed with some tremendous folks down in Franklin, about 20 miles south of Nashville. And right in the heart of the city was a tremendous shunting yard, good shunting yard, railway yard. And just above the railway yard was a cinder block building called the station. And it looked very, very dodgy, but was the home of bluegrass and roots music in Nashville. There was an old petrol station next door and an old motel. And that was kind of the top of the hill. And as you went down the hill, it became Broadway. And there was a whole dose of what they call honky-tonks, really great bars with tiny stages, one street below the Ryman Auditorium. And the Ryman Auditorium is a beautiful old timber venue, half church, half auditorium. And they call it the Church of Country Music. And that's where a lot of folks like Dolly Parton, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Loretta Lynn, Ernest Tubb, all the greats, you know, played there. And they'd all slide out the side door when their set was over and down into places like Tootsie's Purple Orchid, which was a great bar. And these are the, you know, back in the Hellraiser days as well. So this is the Acme Feed Store, which is right down the end of Broadway, right down at the Cumberland River. And it's an old warehouse and all the ritzy-ditzy bars and rooftop bars. But where you want to drink on Broadway is back up at Tootsie's Purple Orchid, immediately below Ryman Auditorium. And it's got a stage that's about the size of a 20-cent piece. And all the greats have played there. And when I was there in the 2000s, there was this kind of crossover cowboy with fairly hot fashion sense, running out sort of rock and roll more than anything else. He went on to become quite famous as Jason Aldean, and we saw him first when he was busking. So that's what Nashville's like. It's full of hot chicken, fried chicken. It's full of soul food. And now that shunting yard that was is completely gone, has been completely renovated, all high-rise apartments. That's called the Gulch. And you'll find Keith Urban and whatnot living there. But back in the day, it was wide open, and the station hotel is still, the station is still there, the Station Inn. And if you're there on a Monday, well, once upon a time, if you're there on a Monday night, you could catch the Time Jumpers, the best of session musicians. Used to tour a lot with the greats, and they made the supergroup, 10 people on stage. But now they're out in the suburbs now because the city's become overrun. So where was I drinking? Tootsie's Purple Orchid, Nashville, Broadway, just below the Ryman Auditorium. Look it up on Google. You'll wish you were there.
You will.
Happy days. Yep.
I was saying to you before, I never got to Nashville, but as a pseudo singer myself, I always thought I'd really enjoy that. And the Blackbird, isn't that one of the bars there where lots of the Bluebird?
The Bluebird. Yeah, they have, they call it Songwriters Circle, where you'll go to this tiny little place in it looks like a shopping centre, a little suburban shopping centre, and you'll get a chair. It's always packed, and there'll be 6 or 7 people, acoustic singers, and they'll play a song and you'll go, gosh, I know that one.
Yeah, yeah.
And what you're doing is you're actually seeing the guys who wrote the songs.
Yeah, right.
It's one of those great places in America. It's a bit like New Orleans, a bit like Memphis, a bit like Austin, Texas. The folks busking on the streets would be session musicians elsewhere.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
good place.
That's awesome.
Good place to drink.
Yeah, I bet. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And welcome everyone we're halfway through season 2. So episode 5, season 2. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you like what you see, or what do we say? At least if you don't hate what you see, please share it, because we are talking to some great wine brands from around Australia, particularly in Barossa. And we are really keen to share those brands with as many people as we can. So not so much for us, although that's nice too, but definitely for the brands that we're talking to, share away, and let everyone hear these beautiful stories from these great winemakers. And haven't we got a great lineup tonight?
Or
I'm a bit nervous.
There's only so many people that get to meet royalty, mate.
Yeah.
And tonight we do have wine royalty on, and there's a few wines in the world that don't need any real introduction, and Penfolds Grange is one of those. And John Duval was one of only 3 people that made Grange with Max Schubert in the world. And when I first came to the Barossa in 1983, 83 through 85, doing a couple of vintages, John Duval won't remember this, but I was staying with Sue Hodder out at a place near the Tanunda Cemetery, and we had a party this night, a hippie party. And one of my most cherished photographs is of me and John Duval dressed up as hippies, and I'm nursing a long neck beer bottle, and John's nursing a claret bottle and a really flash glass of red. And that
you need to dig that photo up.
It sums up the 2 of us. But all the way through, was when I was a youngster coming up, that was always the benchmark. That was always a wine of great personality. Rob Gibson was in our class at Roseworthy, and at the time, Rob was the grape grower liaison for Penfolds, and he knew where all the good stuff was planted, and John was making it. So for us to be able to sit around and talk to John today, and sort of go down memory lane and sit there and have a look what he's doing in the glass now, and of course with Tim on board, his lad. I mean, it's just today's our Meet the Royalty Day.
Do you think they're feeling the same?
No. No, today's our Meet Red Wine Royalty Day, and I think it's just tremendous that that John's given us these wines too, because he's given us a blend and 2 varietals, and it's just a lovely cross section of some of the greatest grapes in the valley. So no, can't give it too many raps, because this is one of the biggies. Yep.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it is pretty exciting. But what I love too is what we saw in season 1. We saw so much Mataro, and we're seeing another one tonight. And I think we have talked about this off camera a bit about, it's the little guys in Barossa that are doing this. We're seeing this Mataro shining through. And have they just tapped into something? What is it that, I don't know, it's great to see.
I think, Kate, it's like any overnight success. It tends to be 20 years coming.
Yeah, in wine, at least.
In my time in the valley, and a lot of other folks around, we can remember not being able to give away Shiraz. It was $200 a tonne, $300 a tonne, and there was still a lot of vintage port being made in the valley out of Shiraz when I first came. So I think it's one of those things that's always been there, and a lot of folks have known about it, and it's like Grenache, it's like Shiraz, and I think the other one that's going to come is Malbec.
Malbec, yeah.
And I think that they're these tremendous old vines that are sitting there doing their thing, and there's folks in the know.
Yes, and the folks in the know, and it's, you know, interesting, you're not seeing a lot of it coming from the big guys, you're seeing it coming from these small producers who have got access to these small little parcels, or access to that, and the ability to make what they want, really. And Matara seems to be a thread that we're seeing, which is really cool.
Yeah, and it's also good to let the viewers know too that it's actually harder to make a large number of small wines in a winery than to make one big one.
Yeah.
If you make one big one, you just bog everything in together and happy days.
And off you
go. If you want to keep bits and pieces separate and neat and tidy, and barrels, and you know, pay a lot of attention to hand plunging and really look after each batch, that's actually a labour of love, and it's harder to do. So to be able to see these wines come through like this is, you know, it's a treat. And I think for wine interested folks out there, it's, you know, it's really like having a passport to the good stuff. And I don't think, you know, nothing against the bigger operators, because, you know, it takes all of us to tango.
Totally.
But it's always, you always see innovation, generally speaking, on the down low, you know.
I like what you said about, you know, overnight success takes 20 years.
Yeah.
I think it does, especially in the wine industry. You know, you're right. I think it takes a little while for people to get their heads around it, people to really understand it and do it really well. And then all of a sudden everyone wants in. So let's see what happens to Mataro in the next 10 years.
Absolutely. Oh, not even the next 10, Kate. You know, we're knocking on the door, I think. Yeah. And you heard it first here, folks. Malbec on the rise.
It was Mataro last season. Now we're going to do Malbec. But we have got Malbec coming up, haven't we?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, which is really cool. So we've rabbited on long enough. Do you think we should just bring our guests over, our royalty?
Bring the boys in.
I'm going to just promote them to a panelist because I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it's actually pretty exciting to see these trends too without even trying.
Yeah.
Because, you know, everyone's really comfortable with Grenache Shiraz Mataro, but we're seeing Shiraz. We're just seeing Shiraz Mataro or Grenache Mataro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
G'day, gentlemen.
G'day.
Evening, Jane. Kate.
There they are.
How are you?
We're in good form.
Good.
Glass of wine in front of us. Who's complaining?
Yeah. I've got the strategically placed on the egg carton brand. Look at that. Yeah.
Good product placement.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's great. Quality. We're only quality on what was I drinking.
We wouldn't expect anything less.
Pretty highbrow stuff. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a real treat.
Pleasure.
It's awesome.
So,
Jane, go for it.
So I'm itching. John, I've got a little bit of an idea of the story, but can you just give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch of the pre-Barossa generations of your family biz? Because a lot of folks probably think that you just sort of jumped in at Grange, which is a nice place to jump in.
Yeah.
But you had generations before, yeah?
Yeah, we had sort of 4 or 5 generations. We're actually not from the Barossa, because my name is not Huffman or Zagensnitter.
No. Sure.
Or Duval.
South of Adelaide at a place called Morford Vale. And for several generations, we had a Suffolk sheep stud. And my grandfather actually was the only honorary member of the British Suffolk Breeders Association outside the UK. And we used to export stud sheep all over the world. Mixed farming, we grew grapes. Coincidentally, Penfolds liked the Shiraz that they bought from our property so much, they took cuttings to replant some of the vineyards at McGill, where Dr. Penfold first founded the company. And as it turned out, when I became chief winemaker and discovered the original blend records for Penfolds Grange, the first few vintages were 50% from McGill and the balance from Morford Vale. So
how about that?
More world. So it's meant to be I work for Penfolds.
It is. Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
What he missed out was that he only had one job interview in his entire life, and that was with Penfolds. So
That was lucky.
Arguably a fairly good interview to pass the test.
One would think so. So before you went to work for Penfolds, what had you been doing?
Well, I did an ag science degree at Adelaide Uni and then worked out that I could do the winemaking course at Roseworthy afterwards. So I remember sort of going for one job interview, got the job with Penfolds. And I think it was the 7th of January 1974, I rocked up at the winery, and it was about 3 or 4 weeks later, the first load of grapes came in the yard, and I said, well, it's about time you made a bit of wine. So there you go.
Wow.
What a auspicious vintage to start in the valley though, John. The 74.
Not really.
Downy mildew and powdery mildew.
Yeah, people were saying it was the worst vintage for 50 years, but it was actually technically a great vintage to learn from because there's a lot of winemaking, I guess, treatments that had to be put in place, pH control, a whole lot of things in terms of sort of the right winemaking for the vintage, and it was a tough vintage.
And yet Tim's arrived on the 2016 chalk and cheese.
Yeah, I was pretty bloody lucky on that one, I can tell you. Yeah. You know, nothing was set up at all, but it was a pretty, I think I started on about the 16th of January and I think we were picking on about the 8th of February. So again, it was a pretty quick indoctrination in the office before we were out in the field.
Yeah, but a good one to start with.
Not bad.
Great vintage, 16.
So Tim, for you, growing up with, you know, your dad as the Grange winemaker, I mean, that's pretty cool, and you probably would have had access to some pretty decent wine over the years and as you were growing up. At what point did you go, that's what I want to be doing, like I want to be working in this business? When did that happen for you?
Well, I think I was probably weaned on Canunga Hill, so that was the early years. You don't just graduate to Grange.
I didn't spoil him with Grange right from the start. He had early stripes.
So
jeez, John, you're tough.
Canunga Hill weren't a bad drink, really. Those Shiraz Cabernets were pretty solid. But I guess growing up in the valley and being immersed in it and not knowing anything else, you kind of just assumed that everybody was like that. And a lot of people and a lot of friends were involved in the industry. I guess it was only later on once you get out of the bubble a little bit, you start to learn, oh, hang on.
Shit, I got it good.
A bit unique there, what was going on. But in terms of getting the wine bug, I guess I worked in wine retail all through uni.
Yeah.
So I knew that I loved wine, and it was nice to taste a few things that Dad might not have had that day or whatever, and bring a few new things home to him, and I guess expand my palate outside of what we had around the family. And then eventually I had a law career for 7 or 8 years before I decided it's time to go back and work for the family. So it certainly wasn't an overnight love affair. It was something that took some thought and consideration. You don't just kind of step into the shoes with all that, you know, pressure and expectation. So I think even if I wanted to do that, yeah, well, you know, I think even if I'd wanted to do that, Dad would have said, no way, go and earn your stripes somewhere, Sonny Jim.
Yeah. That's exactly right. We actually had a family meeting a few years before Tim sort of came on board, and with the three sons, Tim and his 2 brothers, and I said, I'm not going to carry on forever. Is anyone interested in, no compulsion at all, to joining the wine company, our family business? And Tim put up his hand. That's how it happened.
And what do the other 2 do?
Well, second son, Ben, is the general manager of a craft beer and wine business in Melbourne. And our youngest is an architect in Adelaide.
Oh, there you go.
So a quick plug out to Carwin Cellars in Thornbury in Melbourne. Those guys are doing it tough at the moment. Obviously, they're a big craft beer bar, and on premise obviously is in super lockdown. So they've been doing a lot of, you know, craft beer deliveries and quarantinis and all that kind of thing. So Carwin Cellars, look them up, and then brother Johnny.
I wish we could have it going along the bottom. Carwin Cellars.
Yeah, that's it.
That's when we get. That's when we get that grant from the government and go big budget.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, just before we get into the wines that we're looking at tonight, everybody does have a fair idea of Grange, John, but one of your kind of super duper things, in my opinion, was the RWT, the red winemaking trials. So can you give folks, a bit of an idea about that? Because that was your baby, yeah?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the first questions I got asked by a lot of people when I took over as chief winemaker and was responsible for Penfolds Grange, the question was, when are you going to change the American oak and use French oak on Grange? I said, absolutely no way. I mean, you do not change the philosophy of an iconic wine like Grange. You look to the elements responsible for quality. How can you make sure you get the best grapes, the best oak, etc.? But the winemaking philosophy did not change. We fine-tuned it, but the philosophy didn't change. So I saw that rather than sort of change the oak, I saw there was an opportunity to develop a new wine that really focused and showcased the Barossa as well, because if you look at the Grange label, you've got no idea where it comes from. It doesn't mention Barossa at all. So I wanted to feature and showcase the Barossa, more of that sort of black and blue fruit, and age it in French oak. So RWT was my idea, wasn't a marketing idea, because I really loved that expression you can get of that sort of black and blue fruit, and aged in French oak rather than American oak.
I think you can tell it wasn't a marketing idea because the name is incredibly lazy, John.
Well, the true story of the name is that for every one of the Penfolds wines has a 3-letter generic code. And when we were developing the wine, we didn't have a name for it, so we called it Red Wine Trial, RWT. Then marketing did a bit of research and knocked around a few different options, and they came back to us and said, we'll call it RWT.
Yeah. Can't think of anything better.
Big ticket price on that development.
Yeah.
Lucky the wine's good.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah,
that is good.
Yeah. So the other thing too, before we get into it, when you went out on your own, you've got like a theme with a Nexus, Plexus, Elegant. Where did that come from, John?
Well, I went to see Ian Kidd, the design company in Adelaide, and they, well, the top design houses in Adelaide. Now, I didn't want to muck around. I wanted to go straight to the top. So I wanted really not only to come up with a name for the first wine, but I wanted sort of logo, name cards, stationery, the whole bit. So we sort of workshopped different options, and the first wine obviously was going to be a blend with plexus of Shiraz, Grenache and Mourvedre. So we came up with the name plexus, which is a Latin word meaning the combination of elements into a coherent structure, which is a perfect word for a blend. And then we continued the Latin theme with some of the other wines as well. So a Nexus, the Mataro we're drinking tonight, is the English is annex, joining to. So it's a spin-off part of the Plexus program, but we spun off the very special Old Vineyard, which we'll talk about later anyway.
Yeah.
And don't worry, we both don't speak Latin, and we were just basically looking through the Latin dictionary trying to pick out words that had good meaning and sounds, but coming up with wine names is bloody hard. There's so many names out there. So once we had a bit of a theme with the Latin, I think JD was pretty keen to stick with it.
It does make you come across as extremely, like deep and incredibly intelligent.
Well, that's good. Looks as if we fooled most people then.
And it's amazing what you can come up with a couple of bottles of wine under your belt too, Jane.
Yeah. We're just going to delete that reason, and we're going to just insert a really sophisticated, intelligent one. And then that'll be the reason for it. No, that's cool.
And it's interesting you talk about black and blue fruit, because we've been talking on the show about the massive diversity of expression with the varieties within the Barossa. It's not all just Shiraz, it's not all just Mataro. We've got that range of diversity, and if there was anyone that saw that, that would have been certainly you guys at Penfolds with that extraordinary grape resource that you had, going back 30 years across the complete valley.
That's right. You mentioned Rob Gibson's name before, and he played a pivotal role in that in terms of really focusing in and utilising the fantastic resource of growers that Penfolds had access to. and he deserves a lot of credit for that early work that he did.
Hey, John, just thinking, you know, when you went out and did John Duval wines, what was that leap like, going from Penfolds? So you got this great brand that you're working with, it's an icon around the world, it's so revered, and, you know, you're probably having all these wonderful parties, press junkets, all those wonderful things. Then, what was the impetus to go out on your own and do your own wine?
Well, I've been working for Penfolds for 29 years. I've been chief winemaker for 16 years. It was getting bigger, it was getting more corporate. And I was sort of more executive winemaking. I was moving away from getting closer to the wine.
Yeah.
It's very important to have a winemaking voice at the top executive committee, right Absolutely. At the top of the company. And I really valued that. And I think that's such important for wine companies, that particularly the larger wine companies have a winemaking voice at the top of the company. But it was getting bigger, and I thought my timing was right. If I really wanted to do something for myself and my family, the timing was right.
Well, I'm very pleased you did. It must have just been a big leap of faith, I suppose, and off you went, and you had pretty good credentials, I guess.
My wife says I was unbearable just before the release of our first wine. I was actually more nervous because I knew the industry was watching what I was doing.
Yeah.
Of course.
Not only that, the pressure on myself too, my own expectations. And I think I was more nervous about releasing the first John Duval wines from our family company than what I was about the first vintage of Grange.
Yeah.
I've been working for Penfolds for 12 years before I took over as chief winemaker. So I sort of eased into it slightly, but then releasing the first wine for our family label was pretty nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I bet.
How did you go about sourcing the fruit, John?
Through well, I guess I'd sort of half-jokingly say after 29 years for Penfolds, I knew where the good fruit was, but it was through mates and contacts and relationships, and that's continued over the years.
Do you have like a patchwork quilt? These are all the questions I've always wanted to ask. Do you have a patchwork quilt of Shiraz, Grenache, Mataro in certain parts of the valley that you like the expression of? You know, obviously you've seen so much through the years. You know, how do you choose that expression that you like and then put in the bottle?
Yeah, well, I guess it's over the years you've seen what the different sort of regions, sub-regions can produce. I mean, on a slightly more macro style, we like the combination of Barossa Valley and Eden Valley, particularly for Shiraz, because I mean, simplistically, I mean, there's different sub-regions within both areas, of course, but we're looking for more of the structural backbone, I guess, from the Barossa Valley with Shiraz, and then Eden Valley can produce a much more aromatic expression, vibrance, nice acidity, and the two just marry together so beautifully. I think with Entity, Shiraz, I mean, the first three vintages were all from Barossa Valley, and then 2007 was a drought year, very low yields, small berries. I was a bit worried about over-extracting the tannins, and I was worried about losing elegance with the wine. So that's when I started to introduce Eden Valley. So now we use about 1/3 Eden Valley.
Yeah, right.
So if we get started with the, just quickly, we've got two vintages. We've got the Shiraz Grenache Mataro from 2018, and we've got the Straight Mataro and Nexus from 18, and then we've got the Eligo from 17. We've been trying to give folks a bit of an idea that there is vintage variation. So how would you call 18 and 17 comparatively?
Well, 17 was a very different vintage. It was a lot cooler. We had more rain, and it certainly was a more vibrant, elegant vintage. And 18 was just a carryover of soil moisture from the wetter season we had leading up to the 18 vintage, and it was a beautiful vintage. The yields were high, perhaps not quite as high as 17, but had beautiful concentration, just purity of fruit, and we loved it. Tim, do you want to add something?
Yeah, well, I think 17 was one of those out of the box years, kind of like a little bit like 11, but maybe not quite as wet. But for us, it was really exciting. We got to play around with more fruit on that kind of more elegant spectrum for Barossa. And also we had lovely vibrant acidities. And I think in normal years, we're fighting against the heat and racing sugars. So to have a really long elongated ripening season was pretty cool. We could sit back and relax and watch flavour coming in really early, which was cool. And 18, it was almost like a dream vintage, I think. We absolutely love the 18 wines, particularly Eden Valley. I think it's one of the best Eden Valley vintages that we've seen.
Yeah, it's great.
So, you know, all our 18s, Eden Valley plays a pretty strong role. It was just a confluence of kind of vintage conditions and yield almost being right in the sweet spot.
It's interesting you say that about 18, Tim, because the 18 Rieslings from Eden Valley came in really spectacular early, really limey. And that's almost like an early warning system for, you know, when we're going to get a good one. Yeah. When they come in like that, and you get that lime over lemon instead of lemon over lime. It was just one of those years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, do you want to take us through the Plexus? I had some, I called it a extremely tidy, lush, middleweight fruit bomb that just drops, spreads to a channel and runs. I thought it was lovely. So
I love how you describe these.
Well,
my favourite part.
I see.
We don't need to describe it now, Jane. You've just done it.
No.
It's so visual for you. It's brilliant.
I see wine in pictures. I know that sounds really weird.
No, it's excellent.
Yeah. Oh, and before you get started, can I quickly do our meat sponsor moment? Because
of course,
I got it right, I think, with your wines, John and Tim. I made a full bacon jacket meatloaf. So I crisscrossed a pan with bacon and glazed it with maple syrup. And that's how she came out, like that, with that beautiful glaze.
Fantastic.
Good does that look?
And
make me feel hungry, Jane.
I crisscrossed it in. Don't worry, I'm dropping some around tomorrow. So that's pork and veal minced up by the boys at Barossa Smokehouse Butchers in Angaston.
Yeah.
But it's the pattern. It's that glazed maple, paprika and tomato glaze that did the job.
No doubt in you.
I loaded it with celery crunch, pepper and salt, and garlic and onion, and it just loves this blend. So I have enough to drop around, don't worry.
Well,
I dropped a whole kilo one at the butcher's at 7 o'clock this morning before I went to Adelaide. That's kind of part of the sponsorship deal with Pete, Steve and Kyle at Barossa Smokehouse Butchers in Angaston. You would have known this morning and yesterday that they were around because the smokehouse was firing. So good time to be walking up and down the main street of Angaston. So thank you very much. That's our sponsor spot.
Oh, that is gold. Hey, also, just before we get into Plexus, I've had a question from Christopher about Adrian Hoffman's vineyard. So we had him on last week talking about grape growing and viticulture in Barossa, and just curious to know, do you access some of that fruit, and have you been doing that for long, or what? Do you have a relationship with those vineyards?
Adrian was one of the first growers that we started to take fruit from. So we take Shiraz, Grenache and Mataro from Adrian.
Yeah.
Ebony is a great part of the Barossa.
Yeah.
And we love dealing with it. I mean, they've got a history and tradition in terms of the generations in their family, and that knowledge has been passed down. And Adrian is a great fountain of knowledge. Also, he's a great grower, a quality grower.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful? It's nice to all go full circle.
Yeah.
So Plexus, this is Shiraz, Grenache, Mataro.
Yeah, well, Mourvedre as we...
Mourvedre?
Yeah.
Can you talk us through this wine and the process?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, the background. It surprised a lot of people, but this was the first wine I made when we started the family company. And a lot of people were expecting me to release small quantities of super expensive Shiraz.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to build a base for the business.
Yeah.
And not the super expensive wines, but then with Plexus and then with Entity, it built a base for the business. And now we can have a little bit more fun with small parcels of top end wine and really enjoy making those as well. But the other reason for making the wine is I love working with the old vineyards, and working with the growers, we've got access to some vineyards over 100 years old. So really, in terms of what we're trying to achieve with the wine, it's normally around 50% Shiraz, and then about 30% old bushvine Grenache, about 20% old bushvine Mourvedre. And what we're looking for each of the components with the Shiraz is that lovely core blackberry structural backbone that gives the wine. And then with the Grenache, it's more red fruit, more aromatics and more or less spice depending on the vintage. And then the Mourvedre or Mataro comes in much more savoury. We love the acid and the tannin we get with it. And certainly with time in bottle, it certainly picks up more savoury notes, more charcuterie, smoked characters, smoked meat characters, etc. But 100% barrel matured, but very, very small quantity, probably less than 10% new fine grain French oak. And with this one, we started off using hogsheads, but more recently we've been moving to a combination of hogshead 300 litre barrels, older, mostly older oak, and some puncheons as well, the 500 litres.
So lots of people moving towards the puncheon size, just to balance that oak integration, I suppose.
Yeah, we like that combination you get with the fruit and the oak with the larger barrel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And obviously in this wine, we're looking to promote freshness as well. Like, yes, it's just kind of in that serious spectrum of the GSM-esque blends that you can see from the valley. Some of them can be pretty lifted, and some can get that confectionery element. And that wasn't the style that Dad was making. It was always had a bit more seriousness to it, but we want to keep freshness and drinkability in its youth. But this wine can sell for a bloody long time too. I think the O3 was the first vintage, and we're opening them up now, and they're still lovely wines.
Yeah.
So was that 2002?
2003 was the first vintage.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And I've put down here that you've got sandpaper smooth tannins too. They're just really, really lovely. There's none of that burn, none of that rip. It's just and you might think it's middleweight, but it's lush with middleweight, and it's just got some lovely length to it. Yeah.
It does. It's really integrated.
Tannin is such an important part of our winemaking in terms of managing the tannins. Sort of keeping the tannins as fine as we can, but providing structural backbone for the wine.
And how do you do that? Like, what is it from a winemaking technique that you do that if you can share and it's not secret? Just tell us. We won't tell anyone.
Secret. Telling secrets, that, wouldn't it? But no, we're very careful in terms of cap management. We don't necessarily think we have to have high temperature ferments as well, so we have reasonably cool ferments.
So it just does a gentler extraction, those cooler ferments?
Exactly, and just watching, being very careful not to over-extract tannins.
Yeah, and obviously using that older oak gives you more subtle tannins from there as well. Would that be right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and being careful, particularly one like Plexus, where we don't think we need a lot of oak tannin, we need the benefits of a maturation vessel, which the barrel provides. Yeah. But just around 10% new fine grain French oak, that just adds that little bit of savouriness and supports the structure.
It's really cool. It's great. It's a beautiful wine. Beautiful. And for anyone interested, we often forget to do this on What Was I Drinking, so I apologise. But for anyone interested, that's about $40 on your website.
Yeah.
And we highly recommend going directly to the source. We always want to support the winemakers. So $40 for an absolutely delicious wine that's going to age. What do you reckon? How long would that age?
Well, 2003 was the first vintage. So we say, I mean, it's a wine that does drink quite well because it's got that lovely plushness of fruit and savoury characters as well, and finer tannins. So you can appreciate it early when it's fresh and vibrant. But if you like more savoury characters and charcuterie characters to develop sort of 10, 12, 15, and the more structured vintages even a little bit longer.
Isn't that fantastic? That's great. Love it.
Hey, Tim and John, you talk about charcuterie characters, and I've called it earthy, savoury meat butcher shop sweet stuff. What do you think gives the most contribution to those particular savouries? Do you think it's the Mourvèdre or the Grenache?
I think it's the Mourvèdre more so than the Grenache.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly young with this wine right now. It's got that real, I think, red fruit lift from the Grenache, and the aromatics are coming a lot from that Grenache, whereas you get those smoky savouriness, I think, from the Mataro, and it's pretty bloody good Mataro and Mourvèdre is going into this Plexus even, which will get a taste of kind of the larger part of the vineyard. Goes into the Plexus, but a small section goes into the next one. We're having that Annexus. But yeah, I think it's always had a real core structural old vine contribution from really old vine Grenache and Mourvèdre, which I think really plays a hero in that wine.
And even though there's approximately 50% Shiraz, if you get the right old Grenache and Mataro vineyard, Mourvèdre vineyard, they shine through. They really do.
Yeah. It's not just a blunt rock added to the end to give it a bit of a punch. Yeah, and it's an obvious step up too from the Plexus to this particular 100% Mataro. It's just the concentration and depth just is a big step up. I notice on the bottle that you've got 250 cases. So that's 250 6 bottle boxes.
Yeah, I've done a lot of apologising for not making enough of these wines.
Because that's not a lot of bottles.
No.
But by the same token, we don't have a lot of 120-year-old Mourvèdre vines either.
That's right. It's amazing old vineyard at Light Pass, pretty sandy soils from Mike Scholes, and there's a bit of a Penfolds connection in a couple of ways. His father, P.A. Scholes, used to be the manager of Penfolds cellars in New Utah. But for many, many years, Penfolds took the fruit, and it would have found its way into the top fortifieds, probably grandfather of port as well. So
is this all that's from that single vineyard site?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And this is the third release of the Annexus Mataro, the 18. We started with the Annexus label from the 2013 vintage with Grenache. So really it was just highlighting out these single vineyard or close to single vineyard portions of Grenache and Mourvèdre that we just think really need to be kind of put on a pedestal to show the quality that we can produce in the valley. So we started with the 13 Annexus Grenache, and the 16 was the first vintage of the Mataro. And that was the first straight Mataro that you'd made or released, including with Penfolds. So it knew it had to be a pretty good vintage for Mataro.
So it took me a while, didn't it?
Just a touch.
You know what they say, John? Good things take time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's right. So what, was it just because you could access this amazing fruit and you knew that in a great year it was going to be amazing as a single varietal, or were you thinking, I really want to do Mataro because I like its structure, I like the flavour, or was it the vineyard or the variety that spoke to you the most?
It's a bit of both, actually. As Tim said, having started the Annexus label with the Grenache in 2013, when 2016 came along, it blew our socks off, and we thought, well, this deserves to be showcased by itself. So we said, if you look at the Plexus label, actually, it's got sort of the diagram. It's got the SGM.
Yeah. Here's one I prepared earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
very good.
If you cut it down the middle, you can feature the Grenache or the Mataro. So that's what we did. So in terms of the label. So it speaks to the roots of the project in terms of it's annexed off part of the Plexus program. So we've annexed off a part of amazing Grenache and amazing Mataro.
And those components had always gone into Plexus. So when we're not robbing from Plexus, it's some of that material stays in the Plexus, but we're highlighting off a particular part of the vineyard or a special batch that we had in the winery. So yeah, we thought it was great in 16, needed to be kind of championed a little bit, because Grenache, as you probably talked a bit about this too, Grenache was having a little bit of a renaissance by that time, but Mataro was a little bit of the forgotten cousin. And it can be a bit of a beastly wine. It can be very savoury. It can have very aggressive tannins. So we thought if we can handle it right, we get the right vineyard, we can showcase Mataro in all its glory.
Just following on from that too, Tim, my granddad used to smoke Borkum Riff aromatic pipe tobacco, and that has got some really lovely lifted sweet pipe tobacco on it. I mean, for a fairly muscular variety, you've caught some really nice, elegant aromatics.
Very pretty.
And that's not generally what folks would know from Mourvedre. How have your wine club people and your John Duval Wines fans gone with straight Mataro, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, we've only really had a wine club going for the last bit over 12 months, actually. Yeah, we kind of launched it last year. And we kind of offer, the options are really two. You can get one bottle of each of the wines we make, or 2 bottles of each of the wines we make. So
like it.
Pretty simple, really. And we haven't had a single person complain about the Mataro that we've sent out. And I think that kind of speaks to the quality of the wine. In that it can be a confronting variety. It can lack a bit of that mid-palate sweetness that you can get in Shiraz. So, and that was even including the 17 vintage, which was probably a bit steelier and a bit more slaty and mineral than what this 18 is, which is a bit plusher and has got more of that kind of, I think, luscious fruit in it than the 17. But both, because they're single vineyards and from the vintage, just speak to the vineyard and the vintage, which I think is great, which showcases a different side of Barossa than maybe the Plexus and the Entity do, which are blends across multiple vineyards across the Barossa and Eden Valleys, whereas these little Annexus wines are really just transparent from the vintage, from the vineyard.
And are we only likely to see Grenache as a single varietal and Mataro as the two, you know, and you might do them alternate years or you'll have them on similar years? What might the future look like?
Well, it takes a bit of agreement and discussion over these things. But we have bottled a 19 Annexus Grenache, but we haven't done a 19 Mataro. We wanted to make sure the first priority is to preserve the integrity of Plexus, and yields in 19 weren't quite where we wanted it to be in Mataro to make both wines. So we focused on the Plexus. So yeah, it's a year-by-year proposition, depending on the season, depending on what we get through the winery. We'd like to be able to make it every year in small amounts, but it certainly won't ever happen that way. It'll be great vintages will shine, and others we need to make sure we pump the best that we can into Plexus.
Well, with that Annexus, that's I've written down chewy chunks of dark plum jam. Yeah. So if anybody wants to see what Mourvedre can look like on its own in a good year, that's a classic, I reckon. What do you think aging potential is, Tim, on that one?
I think that is a bit too conservative when we give our drinking windows. A wine like that is kind of a time capsule. I think you could keep that for a very long time. But I think one of the things that Dad says is a lot of people don't really like drinking older wine. So why would you keep it 25 years if you don't like drinking something that's fined down, it's got more savouriness to it rather than that kind of deliciousness that it's got as a younger wine? So for me, if I was going to have an ideal drinking window for it, it's going to build some more complexity after 5 years, but that 5 to 15 year window is going to be a pretty smart wine, I reckon.
I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, and looking at both of those wines, and I'm sure it will be similar when we get to I never know how to pronounce it, Eligo?
Eligo. Yeah.
Eligo or Eligo?
Eligo.
When we get to that one, there's the subtle tannins, the integration of all of the elements and the layers is so seamless through both of these wines that we've seen. And there's a really silky palate weight. It's really lovely. Is that kind of what your hallmark is, your brand? Like, this is what you do. You only kind of know how to make those sort of wines.
I think a very quick way of summing up our style is an elegant expression of old vineyards matured in French oak.
There you go. Done.
So, yeah, bang, right? No,
Marketing 101.
But Kate, I think you did nail it. Like, I think coming from the outside and coming back to the family business, I have a little bit of perspective outside of being in the winery during the first 12 or so years that I was making. And I certainly think that is a stylistic element of his wines, is quite a fine tannin structure and that kind of, like, that silkiness across.
Like a ribbon.
So, yeah, certainly something that I admire in those wines. And there's always going to be a time for other varieties and other styles that have got different tannin profiles, but I think that works so well in the food friendliness and a lot of other things with this style.
Yeah, no, that's it.
But before you jump into this extraordinary thing, the Eligo, which I've said, sweet concentrated jet lift of raspberry, blackcurrant, fresh lemon thyme, and a hint of aniseed. I just love this thing. Can I just quickly tell my one grain story?
Yeah, go for it.
Because
I've never told this. I was working at Celador at Rockford Wines, 93, 94, 95. And we've all had these customers. We used to get, a group would come in, mostly blokes, and there'd always be someone that wanted to let you know what they knew. And so this chap was grandstanding at Rockford, and I'd put out the black Shiraz and the basket press, and he was just waxing lyrical about Grange. And this is actually whilst you were there, John, I think, in charge of the project, because it would have been 93. So, which was a tough vintage as well. And I let him go. And then I said to him, I said, listen, I said, I know the guys that make Grange. And the whole place went silent. And I said, because everyone buys it as an investment, thing, and they're not actually ever going to drink it, I said, Penfolds fill half of the bottles with cold tea because they know that's never going to get drank. And I hope you haven't got one of those bottles. Well, you could see the blood just drain from his face. And
that's terrible.
I know.
And he took it seriously, hook, line and sinker.
For about 5 minutes, I let him go, and I really enjoyed myself. And then I said, look, I apologise. No, that's not true. But just for 5 minutes, as I watched the blood drain out of his face, I thought, yeah. So, sorry, that's my Grange story.
That's excellent.
So, Eligo Shiraz, whereabouts is this one parcel, guys, or is this more than one?
It's more than one parcel, and again, it talks to Barossa Valley, Eden Valley, and the attributes and melding the two different styles of fruit together to produce something that we love as a style. The name Eligo is actually Latin to pick out, select, or choose the best. So it very much describes the process. So it's not a barrel selection from Entity or other Shiraz. It starts just before vintage, just before harvest, when Tim and I'd sort of walk up and down the rows of our top Shiraz vineyards, sort of tasting berries, sort of chewing on the skins as you do. And if there's one part of the vineyard that we think has got a little bit more potential, soil variation, or a little lower yield, and we decide to pick that small section separately. So it's all about selection in the vineyard, best fermenter, best barrel, and we only make sort of 500 to 700 cases, so it's a pretty small production, not necessarily made every year. So it talks to the best, maybe a couple of Eden Valley vineyards and a couple of Barossa Valley vineyards as well.
Gosh, that is a extraordinary wine.
I'm going to have to ask the question that how do you get velvety lushness and powerful middleweight and concentration? How do you keep that tidy and don't just end up with a big floppy pillow of lush, juicy fruit? How do you do that?
Well, obviously we're starting with some pretty smart vineyards, so that's where the potential's in the grapes. And then, excuse me, as I was saying, we're very careful about cap management, sort of that structure. We're looking for sort of power, but restrained power. Not that's going to slap you around the face or anything like that. We're not after high alcohol as well. So that's, again, the benefit of a well-managed vineyard where you're getting flavour development, tannin ripeness before the sugar gets too high.
It's that a lot of it is about timing and everything that you do. And so you've got all these decisions you've got to make during vintage about, you know, when you're going to pick, how long you're going to keep on skins, how long you're going to mature, all those factors. But I think picking on the kind of the ascension of ripeness rather than after it's too late is pretty important. So Dad and I will spend just as much time out in the vineyards tasting and walking up and down roads and chatting to growers as we do in the winery during vintage, because there's only so much you can control. And if we can be out there when things are going on and when the heat's going on in the kitchen, so to speak, and during vintage, we know what's going on in the vineyard. We've tasted, we've done our maturity testing, we've gone through the permutations and combinations.
We do all our grape testing ourselves. We don't just get people to bring samples in to us.
Yeah.
We can actually take the samples ourselves
and taste, and there's no substitute for actually tasting and chewing skins. And then I guess that's one of the hardest things for me was coming back to the business. So I'd tried lots of wines, but I hadn't had as much experience walking up and down vineyard rows. And there's no substitute for 47 vintages in the Barossa walking up and down a bit of red dirt. So that's what I'm trying to harness from JD now, is unlocking that knowledge in the vineyard and how you can taste a berry, you know,
and see its potential,
and have that thought process that translates all the way through the winemaking process to the glass. So that's something that I'm trying to unlock, but that's something that comes from experience.
And I reckon that's probably the most thing I can't understand. Like, I get it once it gets into the winery. I can understand what you do there, but how you can assess the quality of the fruit when it's in the vineyard. You know, I mean, I've tasted fruit in the vineyard just before it's been harvested. I don't get what you see. It's a really unique skill, and I can understand why you're trying to get everything you can from your dad, because that experience would be so valuable. I just don't know how you would do that. Are you like the nightmare bride when it comes to vintage time for all the growers, and they're like, oh, here come the Duvals again, they're here again. God. Like,
very low maintenance, Kate. Very low maintenance.
I don't know.
Yeah, we've got our own self-image. That's probably how we perceive it.
Yeah, totally. Like cruisy.
I think there's probably worse that float around in the valley. We ain't too hard to get along with. No. But at the same time, we're dealing with some pretty bloody good growers and some good fruit. So it's in great years, it's our pleasure just to basically work for the growers. The harder years, then there's a bit of work that goes on. And
you've been working with some of these growers for years, haven't you? So that relationship is so easy. And, you know, when they see you coming, they know, exit, back door, like, just run.
No, it's John Duval wines, not John Deaver wines.
Oh, nice! Of course.
Hey,
it's amazing.
My tasting note for this is the classy red bus stops here. That's it. I'm finished. Can you just give us an idea how many parts of the Barossa are here in the glass?
Well, normally it'd be about 2 from Eden Valley and about two or 3 from Barossa Valley.
So we're talking, to get a bit more specific to help everyone out in terms of sub-regionality, usually we're talking about 1 from the kind of central grounds, so maybe kind of the Krondorf area just south of Tanunda.
Richness?
Depending on the year. 1 in the kind of northern area, kind of Ebenezer or Mopper.
Power and concentration.
Yeah, and there's also some really good sandy soils out that way as well. So some of the sites out there can bring aromatics and some finesse as well as power. And then Eden Valley, I guess we're looking for the aromatics, plus texture and acidity. So it's kind of really, that's the kind of broad template, but then it comes down to individual vineyard, individual grower, and the parts of the vineyard.
And did you know when you wanted to make this wine that you were going to pick those regions? Like, did you sort of have that mapped in your head, or did they come to you and did they change maybe?
Well, I knew I wanted to make, I mean, I haven't got the same vineyards as Penfolds and RWT, but it was having developed RWT, I didn't want to copy it verbatim, and I can't because I didn't have the same resources anyway. But it's, stylistically, I was looking for more blackberry, blueberry fruit. So that led me into where we're taking grapes from.
Some nice pepper. There's some nice peppery tones too in there.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably the vintage a little bit as well, 17.
Definitely. Yeah,
So
so obviously 17, we've spoken about a little earlier in terms of it being cooler and spicier and that lovely acid balance. And this was the pick of the crop from 17, where we did have a little bit of issues with Eden Valley and we had to hang on for a while for it to ripen. But in the warmer kind of northern Eden Valley sites, it looked pretty magic. So there's probably a little bit more northern Eden Valley in this 17 than the kind of Eden Valley, east and central.
Beautiful, the complexity, the layers of all the fruit, everything is kind of like you get that initial fruit and then it comes back again later, almost at the finish. It's a cracker.
Good.
Love it. Thank you for sharing.
But a wee pup. It's only been released for a very short amount of time, but I think that's the nice thing about it is you can see it's not too aggressive as a young wine. It's
No, not at all.
Now, but we'll keep sailing on for a long time.
And is that your intention? You sort of it hits the market with a bit of bottle age or a bit of age. How much time is it in oak?
It's normally around the 18-month mark.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't believe in keeping wines for extended time in barrel. So anything from sort of 12 to 18 months across our range. Yeah.
And then it does get an extra year in bottle compared with the entity. So we do hold it back for a little longer because it has a little bit more palate weight and concentration and structure. And I think because we know that it's going to go out through our distributors and our customers and they will try and have a sneak peek of it as a young wine, we still want it to be drinkable. And that's probably one of the things that's changed, I guess, over a couple of decades is that some of these wines that were being made from these vineyards were probably needed time in the cellar before they came into balance. But I guess in our winemaking styles now and tannin management, you can look at it young, chuck it in a decanter for 4 or 5 hours or half a day, and then, or even the second or the third day, popping the cork will look pretty smart.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Very impressed.
Yeah.
But, and you're quite right about the French oak too, because the hallmark of Penfolds Grange was you popped your nose in the glass, and if it smelt like pencil shavings, you're pretty close to the mark, which was all American oak, yeah?
Yeah, well, there's American oak, and they only use the very best American oak, sourced from cooler parts of the States, so we're slower growing, finer grain. So there is American oak, and then there's top quality American oak.
I actually do have another Grange story, drinking it backstage with you two, but that would be too wanky to talk about.
Oh, well, Jane, I've got a wanky Grange story I didn't want to tell either because it was too wanky. But John, you might remember this. You won't remember me in the story, but when we were in Aspen, it wouldn't have been long after you had released the wines and you were selling with Old Bridge Cellars.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was working for Wine Australia at the time, and we were at Aspen Food and Wine show.
I certainly remember the Wine Australia parties at Aspen.
My God, how good were they?
Now I'm not going to be telling tales out of school.
No, I mean, we could. What was it, on 3rd Street? That house on 3rd Street in Aspen?
Yeah,
oh,
exactly.
Man. We got that. We weren't allowed to go back there after about 3 years. But they were certainly good times. But they had Treasury or Foster's at the time were doing a a tasting of like a 12 or 14-year vintage vertical of Grange, and you would have made most of them. And I got to open them and test them with Matt Lane.
Oh yeah, yeah, cool.
And so I got to sit back and try this ridiculous, it was like my first real experience into Grange, and it was a ridiculous one, tasting through this vintage vertical ahead of this ridiculous masterclass they were doing. And you got to see these incredible vintage variations and the development of the wine over time. It was extraordinary.
Great story. Some of the events that put on at Aspen were just unbelievable.
Including the Wine Australia party.
We won't go into
We need another 50 million, don't we?
They were legendary. And I reckon I was at we had a dinner with Oldbridge Cellars the next night or something, and we're sitting outside.
Up the mountain.
Yeah, and it snowed.
Sorry?
It snowed.
And we were sitting outside and it snowed.
That's right, yeah, exactly.
I was there, and I reckon you were there
in
then.
June.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a cracker. Anyway, I always had headaches after leaving that place.
Detox.
So much fun though.
No, I've only ever had two vintages, 1982 and 1996, ever.
82 and
96.
96.
96 is one of my favourite vintages of Grange.
My favourite vintage in the Barossa, John.
Jane only does things very well.
Yeah, it was beautiful vintage.
And 1982 with you two backstage in 95.
Well, that's my birth year, Jane. So you picked a good one. I don't know if it had the pedigree of the 96, but hey, sentiment.
Well, I was only 12 at the time, so I shouldn't technically have been drinking. No, it was. I think it was a good time to see 82 Grange with 12 years on it. You know, but
it was a good year everywhere, wasn't it? Bordeaux did well then.
Bordeaux, yeah.
Bit of a story about the 82 Grange. I mean, when a couple of the wine writers saw the 82, they said, "Well, you guys at Penfolds will change the style." And I said, "No, absolutely not." Reflecting the year, because there was a bit more opulence about it. The tannins were a little bit softer as a younger wine. It really spoke to the vintage. And I just said, wait till you see the 83, which we already had in bottle at that stage, obviously. And it was from a very dry, very early vintage, low yields, monumental structure to the wine. So I did get a couple of letters later after we'd released the 83. He said, "Duval, you were right."
Well, for the record, John, the 1982 Grange was on the backstage rider of U2 in 95 when they toured Australia for the Europa tour. And I asked them how they came to put the 82 Grange on their tour rider. And they said that when they were in Arizona, recording in the middle of nowhere, the Joshua Tree, they sent one of their roadies into town to get a bottle of wine because they're all fans of Big Reds. And he went to this wine shop and he said he chose the bottle because it looked like a medicine label, because, you know, the old typing?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And he bought one bottle back to the studio and they just fell over and said, "What is this? Go and buy everything that was in the shop." So when they toured 1985 Europa with that whole exploding car set, their backstage rider was 6 bottles of 82 Grange every concert. True story.
I had it all worked out.
God.
Didn't they? They were onto it.
Yeah.
Great story.
No, true story. Yeah. And
Nowadays, you would have been touring with them, John.
Well, you had a couple of run-ins, but not quite with U2. But Maynard from Tool is quite a massive pennies and Grange collector too. So I've got a signed menu from McGill Estate from back in the day when Dad's had dinner with Maynard saying stay in school. So I had to comply with that one.
He finished up paying $70,000 for an Imperial of Grange at the Barossa Vintage Festival wine auction. And he's actually a super...
What's the last one?
A while ago now,
I think it was the 2008.
Oh, a long time ago.
98.
Yeah. Wow.
It was the 98 vintage, I'm pretty sure, in Imperial. But he's a really keen wine guy, and he makes his own wine in Sedona in Arizona. And I think he's blogged for the Wine Spectator and the whole bit. So he's a really keen wine guy, actually.
How about that?
Has he seen the Alligo yet, John?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Yeah.
You might have to rekindle the connection there.
I
and
have to.
get some Aligo to Arizona.
Yeah, I'd be saying, I'd be pretty surprised if that didn't fly. As I said, and you know what? It's got all the velvety lushness, but it's got that gorgeous granularly hundreds and thousands tannin that just rolls around beautifully. You know, that's one. It is beautiful at the minute as a great solid brick wall of flavour, but I can see that going on with that lovely acid balance. I can see that going on for 15 years without any drama whatsoever.
Even longer than that, Jane. Yeah.
I always like to be conservative, John.
Well, that's what I get accused of being as well, Jane.
No, so hey, when people are buying on your recommendation, I think it's always good to go safe.
Yeah.
That's right. And you never know how it's going to be cellared exactly, do you? So
Correct.
Before we go, just thank you so much for
Is it
taking
go
the
time?
time out.
Is
to
it
chat with us.
already? Is it go time already?
Yeah. Well,
Oh,
I mean,
sorry.
we could sit back and keep chatting. I suppose.
Yeah, very much.
Shh.
Sorry.
But Tim, I'm curious, are you loving this ride? Like, you know, you made this decision, you're in the business. Are you loving it?
you know, it's I'm very, very lucky at the end of the day. You know, you got to pinch yourself sometimes and go, is this really happening? But I guess with great opportunity, there's also that kind of pressure to continue that legacy. So it's something that I don't take lightly. And I think when we're talking about the future, it's certainly, while we're tasting together and are doing everything together now, I'd never kind of like to revolutionize JDW. It's all about kind of gradual evolution. And I think that's a philosophy that Dad's taken from being a custodian of great wines at Penfolds through to creating our own wines, is that there's a great connection with the Barossa community. There's this legacy of working with these generational grape growers, and there's now a legacy of Dad's wines that he's made over time. So there's a responsibility in all of that.
Totally.
So I take that fairly seriously. Obviously it's a great honour for me to have the opportunity to learn from Dad and to ask these questions, but to, I guess, plot the next, 10, 15, 20 years of another Barossa business.
I think JDW is going to be in good hands, so I'm not worried at all. I
think it's so lovely. It's such a joy to watch, you building this together, I suppose. It's lovely as such a romantic of the wine industry. I just love it. It's really nice to see that legacy being handed down and watching you take it on. Tim, it's excellent. Well done.
Well, cheers, Kate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be TD and JD now.
No, it's wonderful.
And thanks enormously for letting us show these wines. And they'll be going to a maximum number of folks to have a look at them tomorrow around the town. Yep. And I'll definitely give you a hoy and see if you want some meatloaf sandwiches. Or I'll put you on the list for the next one. But anyway, thank you enormously for opening these with us.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for the invitation. We've really enjoyed it.
That's great. It's so nice. Two of probably the nicest people in the wine industry right there. So thank you.
Cheers.
Appreciate it so much. All right, everyone. That's probably...
Are you sure it's go time?
My son's in the background saying, "Don't
into
stop."
The confidential section now.
Yes, things get weird after this.
You should say that I watched John and Tim. I watched Arne's Brush with Fame.
Yeah.
I watched Arne's Brush with Fame last night, and he had Jack Thompson on. And
brilliant.
Jack Thompson was the first ever male centerfold in Australia with Clio magazine.
Clancy of the Overflow.
And I was on a plane coming back from Coffs Harbour to Sydney, and doing a job in Coffs Harbour, and he was on my plane, and we were there to pick up our luggage, and I thought, shall I or shan't I? And I thought, oh well,
Shall.
In for a penny, in for a pound. I said, excuse me, Mr. Thompson. And he looked at me and I said, I just wanted to let you know that you're the first bloke I ever saw that was outside my family with no clothes on. I said, you set the bar high for me all through my life.
You say that to you?
And he just chuckled and he went like this. He said, I wish I'd known you then. I said, I wish you did too. So there you go. It's life, man. You got to love it.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'll see you when it's in Tanunda, lads. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
And again, as we say all the time, go to their website, sign up, join up. I mean, you heard the membership routine there. Amazing. Why wouldn't you do it? 1 bottle of each, 2 bottles of each.
Join the wine club.
Join the wine club. Go online, buy directly from the winemakers. That's what we want to see. And if you like what you see, or at least you don't hate what you're seeing on What Was I Drinking, then share it wide with all your friends and your family. We want to promote these wineries as much as we can. So thank you, everyone. And I guess that's it.
Cheers.
Cheers. Have a great night.
See you, boys.
Guys, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ta-da.
Bye, I'm just ordering book club.